So, Carl Jung, Greenwich Village. Let's meet the man. This pencil portrait by Khalil Gibran is owned by the C.G. Jung Foundation, and for many years it was sitting over the mantelpiece of their bookstore. And then one day I really looked very closely and saw his signature. And that was one of my little rabbit holes that I started to go down. How did Khalil Gibran end up doing Carl Jung's pencil portrait? And with research, I went into the Freud Jung letters, and in March of 1913, just a couple of months after Jung had his personal split, over New Year's he wrote his divorce letter, if you will, to Sigmund Freud, saying it just isn't working out between us. And but he also, a couple of months later, was still the president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, so he continued to have professional responsibilities. And in March, he writes a letter to Freud saying, just a very cryptic reference, told me to be going to America for 5 weeks, March 1913. And this was the little rabbit hole that I went down over many, many years, and this is one of the culminations of that research. What brought Jung to New York in 1913? First of all, there was a professional concern. He was a leading Swiss psychiatrist, certainly famous as Freud's crown prince. And for many wealthy Americans, Zurich, more than Vienna, was a destination for analysis. And the family that he got most connected to was the Chicago family of the McCormicks, the famous McCormick Reaper family, on the Chicago Tribune. And the real centerpiece of his family was the marriage of Harold McCormick to Ruth Rockefeller, who was, of course, John D. Rockefeller's daughter, and she was quite a dynamo, and she decided that she wanted to do analysis. Jung came several times to America to meet the family in Chicago, and but she decided this was not enough, this transatlantic analysis, and she decided to pack up the family and some of the governesses and go to Zurich to live for several years. So Jung, one capacity was a professional one, to meet her and escort her and the family back to Zurich. But my focus is not on that. It's much more what he learned and how he came to be in Greenwich Village. She was probably at some uptown hotel, of course, and he took good care of her. So here's Jung, and now to step back 2 years a little. First of all, this is the studio building. If any of you were here at the Gibran talk several weeks ago, you might have seen the exact same picture. I went online too, like the other speaker did, and it seemed the most appealing of the images of the studio building. The studio building was just down the block at 51, replaced in the 50s or 60s by a nondescript apartment building. And this was the leading building, first one built specifically with artists in mind. The lighting, you can see big lighting for studio light. And I don't know what floor, I haven't tracked that down, just where Jung would have visited, but he would have visited Gibran in the studio building for that pencil portrait. What New York lecture is worth its salt if you don't mention real estate. Gibran's rent was $20 a month, so you know, to get this real estate stuff. So this was where he met and was drawn by Gibran. But now, how did he get here besides just the professional connection to the Rockefellers? And if you can see the title, this is the Weimar Psychoanalytic Congress, 2 years before. And I call this the best class picture of the early psychoanalytic movement. There were, I think, 55 attendees, 48 are in the photograph. Of the 48, 40 have been identified. I have identified one since that was published years ago. But the entire group, many of them have their own biographies and all that. And one can only imagine this is a very static portrait painting. I invite you to imagine the connections among all these people. Students, friends, rivals, so just, it's to imagine, to kind of project the dynamism that would be contained in this group. I'm sorry the pointer doesn't work. I was told there's a technical reason why TV screens don't take the, so I'm not going to step over the cord, but if you just take a moment, most of you I'm sure can pick out Sigmund Freud, who is quite, pointedly in the center of the photograph. And there's a famous story, I don't think it's apocryphal, that to give him extra stature, he stood on a little box. And Jung, who towered over Jung, deliberately hunches to give his father figure the place of pride. So you see Freud in the photo to his right, Carl Jung, and then in front of Jung is his wife, Beatrice Henkel. And the figure who's going to be the main subject of tonight's talk is the woman to her left. This is Beatrice Henkel, MD. I'll say more about her in just a moment, of course, throughout the talk. But what's important now is the number of women sitting in that front row. Of course, psychoanalysis, of course, patriarchal is now deemed about early psychoanalysis in particular. Certainly the door was open to people. And each one of these women, of course, has her own story to tell us, but I will focus on Beatrice Henkel. And who was Beatrice Henkel? Let's meet her a couple of years later. So this was 2 years before. Now here's Beatrice. And one thing that's always captured me as I spent so much time with these photographs, imagining them and trying to learn from them, is the dramatic change in attire for Beatrice. Of course, in her first picture, she's a professional woman at a conference in Europe, and now, 5 years later, she's in Greenwich Village. And it just reminds me of the wonderful photograph we have of Ola Catherine on the wall over here. This was the look of the new women in Greenwich Village at this time. A little bit of a Walt Whitman, leaves of grass, openness, I would suggest. So Beatrice, she's a remarkable woman. Born in California, she graduated from what is now Stanford Medical School in 1899. And what struck me when I found out that she was 8 of the women of the class, 8 of the 32, 25% were women, which was remarkable, I think, already for 1899. She got her degree in neurology, she was a neurologist, and she was in San Francisco, and she was the first woman to become a city physician in the United States. San Francisco and the West, far more progressive than the eastern states. Women in many of the states were getting the right to vote, and she just reflects some of that progressive spirit of the West. And she certainly had the credentials. Some of the research, her husband was an assistant district attorney. I'm sure that did not hurt her chance to get a position as a doctor, but certainly she did it on her own merits. So she was in San Francisco, but what an ambitious person she was. Could have stayed there. In 1905, she decided to move to New York with her 2 children. Her husband had died, she was a single mom, and she packed the kids and came to New York. And what's interesting, she came in 1905. And I realized that looking at calendars and the importance of chronologies, if she had stayed to 1906 with the earthquake, she probably never would have moved east. She would have been up to here with professional responsibilities that would have traumatized the city in 1906. But she did leave town, came to New York. She got an apartment in Gramercy Park, and started a professional career at Cornell Medical School. She was already a woman of reputation medically, and she founded the second psychotherapy clinic in the United States with America's leading neurologist, Charles Dana. So here she is going right to the top. From California, city physician to New York, Cornell Medical, a psychotherapy clinic already. But she also published. She was the lead article in a 1909 psychotherapy journal, the leading journal of the time in the United States. And at the end of her article, she says, there are two German-speaking doctors who are doing some really interesting work in Europe, and what their contributions will be, we don't know yet, but I do want to go and find out. So she packed the kids again. She left New York, sailed to Switzerland and Europe and Vienna, and she spent some time with both Freud and Jung before going to the Congress where you saw her photograph. And I wish I was a fly on the wall. Freud went to Zurich to meet her. So the four of them, Freud and Jung, Emma and Beatrice, all traveled by train from Zurich to Weimar. And I only wish I could have been a fly on the wall to hear their conversation, but that's a dream. So here's Beatrice. But now she's coming back to New York. She's been in Europe. She's gotten to know Freud and Jung. And if you recall her position, if I may just remind us, the fact she is seated in the middle is no accident. We know photographs are arranged, often in family photos, who's at the center of the photo, who's on the margins of a family photo. We know often the time it seems very spontaneous. But then, maybe upon reflection and time, you realize that some of the positions in the photograph were certainly not accidental. So she would have certainly been invited to have the seat of honor, Freud over one shoulder and Jung over the other. Both men would have seen her as a definite person they wanted to connect with regarding the future of psychoanalysis in the United States. So, there she is. And on a personal note for Jung, the women on the extreme left and the second from the right, the woman on the extreme left was an assistant of his, Maria Molzer, who was about to leave the Jungian orbit a little bit at this time, and she was replaced by the woman second from the right, a woman named Toni Wolff, who became his anima figure, his inspiration, mistress, and many other things, many stories, if you recall, some of his escapades. So, but Beatrice Engel, here she is, and now, 5 years later, in New York City. So Beatrice. Now the footnote reference that is in the Freudian letters, the scholar identified a reference that Jung says that I'm going to be speaking to what was called the Liberal Club. The Liberal Club was founded around the turn of the century, 1902 or 3, and it was New York's leading reform club. You don't understand 20th century New York without the role of clubs. Of course, those years have so sadly faded for people's social, intellectual presence and involvement. But it was the Liberal Club. Among its founding members, most were like British socialist types, Walling and among them were the founders of the ACLU and the NAACP. So this was quite an organization for her to be part of. So here she is involved in the Liberal Club, which was only a block from her apartment up in Gramercy Park at the time. Well, the Liberal Club, like all clubs, was evolving. And the person you're seeing here is, and I should say, Reverend Percy Stickney Grant. He was the pastor of the Church of the Ascension on Fifth Avenue, just a block away. And let's now pause for a moment and think about the demographics of Greenwich Village. By turn of the century, and certainly by 1913 and 14, Greenwich Village had been changing so dramatically. Of course, the famous Anglo-Wasp families were still on the north side of Washington Square Park, the world of Edith Wharton novels. But to the west of the park and south, of course, the biggest was the wave of Italian immigrants moving in. And along with that were all the young college grads from places like Vassar, University of Chicago, and elsewhere, as they moved to New York, as they still do today, to find their careers and their lives. So, Grant was a believer in the social gospel. That here was a WASP citadel bastion on Fifth Avenue, but times were changing, and he was one of those people who was going to be an agent of change in the church. One of the things I guess he's famous for was he made pews you no longer paid dues on a pew. The church was now open to all comers. So a small but significant step in such a controlled environment. But more importantly, he looked beyond just church affairs, and around 1907, he started what was called the Public Forum. And the Public Forum was a Saturday night meeting, weekly, for all kinds of people from the neighborhood, labor activists. Margaret Sanger spoke there, and others. And so, but what it appealed to were these Greenwich Village activists, IWW, labor activists, as I said, others, and they were attending these meetings and starting to be outspoken, vocal agitators. And what Grant decided to do was to merge his public forum with the Liberal Club. So what you have is this organization called the Liberal Club, which had actually three branches. It had, the original socialist crowd of political social activist reformers, then the social gospel members of the church community, and then finally the young radicals who we most remember about this time. So they move in and they started to get very outspoken. And this was the group that Jung spoke to about dreams. And we often hear about, as I had in my opening notes, the standard history, the standard narrative is that A.A. Brill introduced psychoanalysis to Greenwich Village. But in fact, it was Carl Jung, at least the year before. And they weren't just hearing about it secondhand, they were hearing it directly from one of psychoanalysis' leading figures, Carl Jung. He was invited by Hinkle to speak to the group. The actual original lecture does not exist, but components of it were incorporated in later articles about dream work. And the most interesting theme, which he was about to depart ways with Freud, not just emotionally and personally, but also theoretically, was he believed that the unconscious has not just a regressive component, but it also has a progressive component. Where does the unconscious, where's it going to take you as it unfolds in dream work and so forth and so on? So that's the theme that he shared with these people that night of his lecture in 1913. And so very much the progressive spirit of America, which was having its high tide in 1912 and 1913. The election of 1912 was the high water mark of liberal, progressive, social stuff. It was Wilson gets elected. Eugene Debs scored the highest number of votes in his continued career running for a candidacy for president. And so that was very much the milieu of this time. Progressive spirit, also revolution. 1912 was just 7 years after the failed Russian Revolution of 1905, and the Mexican Revolution was in full swing. So all this was very much political, and cultural revolution was so much in the air among these people and in this neighborhood at the time. So Grant was the president of that liberal club at the time. I guess it was a rotating thing. He brought people in, so he got to be maybe the rotating president. And now just to pivot, I guess you know where this is. But the main thing to point out is the 6th Avenue L. And I did a little more research about it. Of course, I found this 1930s photograph. And doing the research on the photo, I believe they said, the article said that the L was dismantled, I think, in 1938. So, but now that really it literally cut through Greenwich Village. And of course, right out our window, you would be hearing the rumble of the elevated train right now. But not just the rumble of the train, think of the change in the neighborhood. The cinders that are falling on everybody as they walk up and down 6th Avenue. This was becoming a rundown, dingy part of town. And it attracted all kinds of people, the marginal people of a society. Of course, we mentioned the bohemians moving in for those $10 and $15 a month rents, because those brownstones were being subdivided. As the Lost families sold their brownstones and moved uptown, landlords moved in and divided up those brownstones into apartments. So, that whole change in the lifestyle of Greenwich Village. So, now, this is one of the many pictures done by John Sloan, the realist, and it's called The Night Court. Now, this would have been, the room right next door was the Night Court, so right now of course, back then it was not a library, as we all should know. It was a courthouse. And the Night Court was held right here in the large children's room adjacent to this room. So, what you're seeing is right next door. Of course, let's go back in time. What's going on here? Of course, I'll let your eyes be your teacher, the pointer. So, there's only one woman in the picture, the woman standing to the left, and she was a prostitute. Of course, they plied their trade up and down 6th Avenue, and there she is being hauled in. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the rather nonplussed John, who's been picked up with her. He's probably some salesman from Toledo, Ohio, who thought he was having a little fun in New York City, but didn't know that a local cop was going to scoop up him and the prostitute and haul them into Night Court. So I can imagine he was there kind of bubbling, babbling away about, I don't know, she was a prostitute, I was just looking, to have a drink with somebody. And he would be dismissed, no doubt. But she would have been fined if she hadn't been able to pay off the cop to begin with. So here she is. And I bring this picture in partly because of our location, but also just to create that spirit of what's going on in the village at the time. Now I can't begin to catalog all the young women who were attracted to Beatrice Hinkle. She comes back to the village. She now has brought Jung to the village as a speaker. They're meeting Jung. They actually, many of them were members of what's called the Heterodoxy Club, a very, very important group to know about. It was America's first feminist organization, the Heterodoxy Club. It met every Saturday from 1912 to the early 1940s. A major, major group. And the papers are up in Radcliffe, a beautiful, beautiful group of documents about this incredible group of women. So, now, one of the women in this orbit, if you will, was somebody I got to know only by tracking down Beatrice Hinkle. Her name is Charlotte Teller. And just, she deserves a little bio background. Charlotte was from Colorado. Her father was a labor lawyer. You may recall something from the American history called the Teller Amendment. That was her uncle. So just, she was very connected. She went to the University of Chicago for a degree. And then, like so many, we know, gravitated to New York City. And she lived on Lower Fifth Avenue, in, I think it was number 3, Fifth Avenue, on an old brownstone that became a communal living arrangement. It got the nickname the A Club. And a local wag said, well, A stands for anarchists, because they were all of the above. She and her friends had this communal home. And of course, these were all up and coming men and women in every field of journalism, labor activism, quite a remarkable group. The whole book could be written just on the A Club members. So Charlotte Teller lived there, and one of the people she got to know in the neighborhood was Mark Twain. He was in his last years of his life. He liked to still socialize. He socialized at the A Club, and she got to know him as, you know, a wonderful friend. So Charlotte Teller. Well, by 1912, this is 1908, and if you'll notice, she was also part of the Gibran struggle. So you just think of all these interlocking intersections of personalities. It's just remarkable just how close they all were, because we know how physically close we are. Things are 10 minutes away if you use this as the center of your radius. So, you know, she lives at Fifth Avenue. She got involved in the public forum. Even today, when I did some research at the church, there's still a story that there's backstairs that she used when she had her affair with Percy Stickney Grant. So, you know, so all kinds of stories still circulate. Oral history is still alive and well 100 years later. That oral history is passed on. So, very involved, all these folks. So, she's now a journalist. And Beatrice Hinkle arranged for her to interview Jung for the New York Times in 1912. There's a group of anthology of Jung's papers. Originally, you know, she was not ID'd, and with my research, I was able to bring her forward into the Jung story. So Hinkle arranged for her to interview Jung. It was a top story the previous fall, September, when he was here also in September 1912. So she helps to put Jung on the map. He comes in March the following year, just months later. Everybody wants to hear him. He's a celebrity figure. And she and the group invited him to a heterodoxy dinner. A group of the heterodox younger women lived at Patchen Place #1. If you're familiar with Patchen Place, it's one of the most special places in Greenwich Village history. It's just on this side of the library. Although there's a gate there, you know, it is open to the public. At first, when I went to research, I said, "Oh, you know, can I crash the gate?" And you know, of course, it is people's, you know, but you know, the gate you go in, and just enjoy one of the most. It's just as it was in 1912 or 13, unchanged. And #1, the first house on the right, was where Jung attended a dinner party with the these women. So he was quite the celebrity at the time. And so they were all meeting him. And one of the things I want to pivot to now is they're interacting with Jung. For so long, I thought, oh, Jung brings his thought to Greenwich Village as the great man, the great thinker, of course, and he did. He intrigued them with his ideas about dreams and creativity. But I also realized, this is my theory, is that, of course, he learned as much as he might have taught. And what he learned from these women is he got an earful about women. An earful, because, of course, Beatrice and those women I pointed out in the European picture were certainly progressive, but not to the degree that these American women were. And they just didn't listen, they talked back. So. And I propose that just possibly his famous theory of the animus, in Jung's thinking, an anima is a man's internal image of women, if you will, projections in art and dreams, and his alternative male image in a woman is what he calls the animus. And of course, we also know the origin of the word animosity. And his take on animus has often been criticized over the years since as being very unsympathetic, because I think, they cornered Jung and gave him an earful about, what was going on about women's issues. So that's a theory of mine. But one of the things that she learned from Carl Jung, and this is directly from his famous book, which is called Transformations and Symbols of the Libido. The book, probably the most important book of Jung's collected works for this period of material, is what's now called Collected Works Volume 5, Symbols of Transformation. So just, if you're interested, maybe you know it, or, this is that period where he's dealing with libido theory, differentiating himself from Freud. And one of the things he started to notice, and this is very prescient, I think, then and now, is as he was dealing with these mostly wealthy American WASP clients, he was working with their dreams deeply and always, and what he started to notice was patterns. And what he started to be evolving was what he later called the shadow. There's a figure in our dreams, who's always there, is a strong presence, but often a troubling presence. And what he started to notice in the WASP psyche was a split in what we would call the shadow. African Americans, of course, were rapists and criminal. Now, this is the white psyche. This is Jung's reading of that WASP psyche. Blacks represented criminality and all that repressed sexuality. He was quite aware of that in the dreams over and over. But what's interesting is that the shadow can often be split, just as one is the more negative dimension of the shadow. What he noticed in the collective dream life of these people was that the Native American Indian was functioning now as what we would call a hero ideal. So, let's just do a quick back check. 1890, Wounded Knee Massacre. The last gasp of Indian independence or spirit was crushed at the Wounded Knee. Also, the frontier was officially closed by the census of 1890. The word frontier actually had a legal territorial definition, so many people per square mile out west. And the census concluded that there was no longer an American frontier. So those two events really mark a real changing point in American history. And so after 1890, this savage is no longer so savage because they've been nearly exterminated, but now they are noble. They're an ideal. So, here we go. This This is on 42nd Street today in front of the Nate's Sherman Tobacco Shop. So, of course, what is now maybe a relic of an old marketing scheme, which was ubiquitous. Every town in America had a tobacco shop. Every American was, putting Indian over and over again without thinking. So certainly one thing then and now that the Native American fulfilled for the new American system was marketing, a brand name, all kind of cigarettes or whatever. But 1913, this beautiful, beautiful nickel was first released. So it's that little moment in time. So for the first time, we don't have an Indian head, faux white woman with feathers in her hair. This was based on, I guess, multiple portraits of several Western chiefs. And of course, the ubiquitous buffalo. So very much that moment in time that we're talking about. So that Indian, keep that Indian ideas in your mind. But now, we have this painting, excuse me. I'll leave it up for a while, maybe we can talk about it during Q&A if you wish. Come back to it. But Charlotte Teller was not happy enough, like so many. New York was still just a stopping off point, because Paris was in all of their sights, both before and then. Moves on from Munich, he moves on to Berlin, and this is one of what's called the America series, and a whole new pictorial schema that he had. And I contend, I argue, if you will, that some of the prompting for this has been widely written about, books just about these series, but I don't think the explanations are quite satisfactory. Most art historical accounts of this period in Harvey's career, they say, well, Indians were popular, so why not do some Indian pictures as an American, and they sell to the German, art buying public. Certainly a factor. I guess just like when Picasso went to the Anthropological Museum in Paris, Harvey did the same thing in Berlin, their folk art anthropology museum. He would have seen so-called primitive artifacts, certainly that, but I would contend that it's a little more than that, because he became a very intimate friend, stayed a close friend of Charlotte Teller for a number of years, and I would contend that she shared with him as he was exploring his own creativity and psyche, if you will, that she probably articulated that idea from Jung, that Americans, modern Americans, too modernized, too civilized, we have to get back to our native roots. And for Americans, native roots were, so close at hand, were Native Americans. So, pivoting back hard, but now back to Carl Jung and Beatrice Engel. They spent a number of weeks here, and it's now been proven with documentation, and I wasn't surprised. I always assumed it, I inferred it, but it's now been proven from documentation that Engel took Jung to the Armory Show. Of course, the Armory Show was the blockbuster of the 20th century, turning America on to modern art. And the most famous picture, probably the most widely known of the pictures of the time, and the one that was parodied, it didn't really scare people, it totally puzzled them. Matisse drove them crazy because he painted blue nudes, and we all know nudes aren't blue. And actually later, Matisse was burned in effigy later in Chicago, so Matisse drew the ire of the people who were the cognoscenti about art. Actually, Duchamp's picture didn't draw their ire. he drew their puzzlement. What the hell is this picture? It was widely parodied. One local cartoonist called it Subway Rush Hour. So I think you can't still beat that today. So, Subway Rush Hour. But here is art moving toward abstraction. Duchamp in the School of Paris, of course Picasso. And I was speaking to a class at LIU students, and I spontaneously recalled the movie The Titanic. And if you remember the one scene where Rose is showing off the art she bought in Paris, coming back to the States. And of course it's not accurate, it's of course fictional, but she shows Picasso's and some others. Of course, not true, but it certainly captures the flavor of what the hip Americans were doing at that time, like Hartley and Teller and others. So, here's Duchamp. Jung later wrote about this. And I'll save the quote just because of the time allowance. But in 1925, he gave a very insightful analysis of the picture, which indicated he just didn't read about it, he actually would have seen it. And the quality, the quote would be too long to read, but what's important is the sense of dynamism and motion. So 1912, 1913, things are in full swing, as far as the so-called modern movement is underway. Speed of subways, and of course electricity, telephones, and the rest. And certainly so much of the spirit of that time. So here's Duchamp, the most famous, and it's interesting to track where the painting was put. It was put in the extreme back of the Armory, because it forced everybody to walk through the whole show to get to the picture that everybody wanted to see. Very clever of those promoters. And the room was quickly dubbed the Chamber of Horrors. So everybody went. Caruso and everybody, Teddy Roosevelt, everybody who was anybody, and everybody else went to the show, and everybody had to go see Duchamp. So, but what's interesting in researching the Armory Show was that the biggest seller was the famous French symbolist painter Redon. And not as well known today because with the advent and the domination of the William Baer, modernist story, the School of Paris, other schools were quickly marginalized in art history, and they're only slowly coming back to their rightful places. And one of them is symbolism. 1890s, Art Nouveau, much of the spirit of that, up until World War I, when there's quite a break. So here's Redon, drew this, it's historical, there's all kinds of poetry written. Maeterlinck, famous Belgian symbolist, poet and playwright. So that was the dominant cultural moment. And Redon was the biggest seller. The statistics aren't important right now. Any number of his paintings from the show sold, as did the lithographs, which of course are far more economical to purchase. And Jung's library, the books in his library are available, and he bought Redon's collected graphic works a year later when they became available. So here is Jung, seeing Duchamp, seeing all these people, Brancusi, seeing all of those incredible artists, and many Americans too. But he walks through this, he doesn't buy anything, but he's been so exposed to this. And tonight's not the night, unfortunately, to talk about it, but with his break with Freud, he was trying to create a new post-Freudian identity. And this was going to take him into his famous Red Book activities. And of course, this, unfortunately, no time allows for that. I wish I could. But he later begins an incredible magnum opus of writing, of collective fantasies, visionary states, and artwork. And I his break with Freud says, this is the way you gotta go. Don't just talk about it with clients, but that creativity that's in all of us needs to be lived out. And Jung took that to heart himself and worked on this famous Red Book for many years. So here he is, he's been in New York, exposure to the young Greenwich Village, avant-garde, feminists, the Armory Show, but then he, of course, packs his bag and goes back to Zurich with the McCormick family in tow. But then what happens after that? Let's get back to Beatrice. She's still around. She's been a chaperone in Greenwich Village to the Armory Show, but she decided to align herself with Jung in his break with Freud. She was a founding member of the New York Psychoanalytic Society, but when she reapplied for membership, she was denied 4 black balls against 3 white balls. It's in the notes up in their library archives. And so why did she? Here she was, a leading psychoanalyst. She was almost like a den mother to the Greenwich Village crowd. Many of them analyzed with her. She did consciousness-raising groups with the Heterodoxy. Consciousness raising did not begin in the 70s. They began right here around 1913 to 15 to 17 to 18. Because these young women were sorting out their lives, their careers, and she, part of these, it wasn't individual analysis. She did group consciousness raising sessions. Remarkable. So here she is, so very, very active. And why is she blackballed? It's bad enough she was a woman, but she had the audacity to side with Carl Jung, and that was put you beyond the pale. That was the litmus test, and she didn't live up to their litmus test. She was denied, but she went on her merry way, didn't stop her at all. So she translates Jung's famous book into English. It's called The Psychology of the Unconscious. I don't want to burn you with too many names, because the book is hard to track from German to English to the collected works title. But this translation came out in April of 1916. That earlier picture of her is probably a publicity picture from the company. You know, it has that book of a publicity shot. It's the Getty image, it's most famous and available. So she translates the book. It's released in April of 1916, and it became a bestseller. Everybody who was anybody in Greenwich Village was reading it, borrowing it. Maybe they stole it when nobody was looking. You know. But anyway they could get the book, they were reading the book. And one of the most important people of the time, and just a little snapshot, Eugene O'Neill said this book was the most important book of psychoanalysis that he ever read. If there was ever a book that influenced his dramatic work, it was Jung's book. And that's Eugene O'Neill.
What was the name of the book?
The name of the book is called The Psychology of the Unconscious. It's currently in the collected works in a revised state, Symbols of Transformation, but the original is called The Psychology of the Unconscious, and it's now an addendum to the collected works. But what unfortunately the collected works addendum left out was her introduction. She wrote like a 75-page introduction that was so clear it was released as a separate booklet, and it was just a quick handbook about the main ideas of Freud and Jung. And I think that most people probably just read the introduction and skipped all those pages of Jung later on, you know, because even in English it was a little bit of a challenge. But O'Neill read it, and the Provincetown players all passed the book around. And another person who owned the book was Alfred Stieglitz, the famous modernist American photographer. photographer. Stiglitz read the book just at the time he was meeting Georgia O'Keeffe. The transition from his previous love interest, Catherine Rose, sort of a transition as the book was out, he's transitioning to Georgia O'Keeffe. And who's up on the screen now is a fellow named Waldo Frank. Not a very well-known name, but when you dig into Greenwich Village history, you know, the circles of incredibly talented, interesting people just expands exponentially. And one of those figures is this fellow Waldo Frank. He was one of the editors of the leading literary journal of the village at the time called the Seven Arts. And the Seven Arts was due, again, to the influence of Beatrice Hinkle. She had a wealthy WASP client who didn't know what to do with her money. Beatrice says, sell your whistlers and let's start a new journal. So the woman did, and she subsidized for just 1 year, but it's one of the most important cultural journals of the 20th century, the Seven Arts. Waldo Frank was one of the editors. They had meetings at Beatrice's apartment, editorial meetings. So just, again, to locate Beatrice in so many, many important circles. So here's Waldo Frank, again, a picture taken by Stiglitz. And this is unfortunately, not a very good copy. It's kind of a copy of a Browning incident, about a Browning shot. And it's his wife, Margaret Naumburg. And this will be starting to come to the end of the talk. Margaret was more than just Waldo's wife, obviously far more important than just that role. She and many of her friends were the pioneers of progressive schools here in Greenwich Village. She started what later became the Walden School. You may know it best as the Walden School. And I did some research, and the founding manifesto was directly, almost a quote from Jung's book, talking about the importance of touching creativity, not just in analysis, but in everybody's lives. So her manifesto, when she and her friends started the school, was, we have to connect with the unconscious, encourage creativity in children, avoid the factory road model, which still haunts education. And so she was a pioneer and directly influenced by Hinkle and Jung. So as I start to bring my remarks to an end, here is Georgia, and I want to read the quote. Anita Pulitzer was the woman who brought Georgia O'Keeffe to the attention of Stiglitz. And this was from her notebook. It's in the South Carolina Historical Society's collection. It's her notebook when they were both art students. And I just love to post this again. You notice the new woman. But also I delight in the quotation, which I'll read. This is her dear friend, who's a bit older, a little more mature, more of a role model for Anita and her somewhat younger friends. Miss O'Keeffe looks like a thoroughbred horse. Boy, is that classy. Talk about Georgia, it's always present. And now we know her through many of Stiglitz's photographs on it. So, but what I found in digging, all these threads of history to discover and bring together, when Georgia came to New York to do some studies over the summer of 1916, the summer Jung's book is out. She stayed with the Pulitzer family, and they were passing the book around. So just to give you that thing for circulation, the book And not just the book to read, but the conversations that were triggered by all these incredibly interesting, creative people. And it was just that moment in time when Jung's ideas resonated with this progressive avant-garde circle of our dear Greenwich village. Thank you.